James Matlock is a research fellow at the Parapsychology Foundation and has written 2 books on his research into reincarnation. He's currently working on a unique and original, world-first series of scientific papers that are dedicated to exploring death-related phenomena in animals, such as end-of-life experiences, after-death communications, reincarnation, and more. In this part 2 of our interview, we focus on those papers and whether there's any evidence that our pets and other animals survive bodily death. Please see the description for timestamps, relevant links, and other interviews that you might enjoy. So to get part 2 started, Jim, could you please tell me how you first became interested in end-of-life and death-related phenomena in animals?
I talked about my Science of Reincarnation group on Facebook, and in that group, people would every once in a while come up with stories about animals. And so I was aware of this, and I also read very, very widely. And so I was aware of that there were accounts of pets, near death and, after death, that sound remarkably similar to humans. But then, but it never occurred to me really to take that on in a serious way, because it had never been done before. I mean, it was this whole area was sort of out there, I mean, it was just sort of, this is interesting anecdotal stuff to read, but you can't talk to animals in the same way you can talk to people, right? Because there's no way really to investigate it, and it was interesting to think about, interesting to read, but and then earlier this year, and people that I respect a lot, including Rupert Sheldrake and Michael Nahm. Nahm is Sheldrake would be well known. Nahm is a German biologist. Published a paper on end-of-life experiences of animals. Now, what are end-of-life experiences? Those are showing how the end-of-life experiences of animals are so similar to humans. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about animals seeming to see apparitions when they die. Animals whose bodies are compromised, or brains are compromised, suddenly reviving, just like in terminal lucidity with humans. We're talking about indications of sudden energies right before they die, things like this. And they sent this paper to the Journal of Scientific Exploration. Now, everybody knows, I suppose, that to get into an academic journal, you go through a review process, a peer review process, right? Well, I was one of the people who received this as a peer review as part of that process. So I saw this paper before it was published, and I immediately thought, oh, wow. And we've got to take the next step here. We have got to go on to after-death experiences of animals. After-death communications of animals. Because remember, I had seen these things come up. I had seen the accounts of them. And I hadn't wanted really to take them on, but here was this paper that, it was published by these 3 people, and 2 of whom, I knew and, respected, and, this was the perfect chance to do it. So I wrote to Michael Nahm, who actually had contributed, we mentioned the last time we talked, one of my books, called Signs of Reincarnation, and Michael Nahm had actually contributed the afterword to that book, and so I knew him because of that, and I wrote to him and asked him whether they planned to do this, and at that point they hadn't planned to do it. So that is go on to the next step. At that stage, and I asked him, would you be interested in doing this with me? I mean, I can use my Facebook group, I can use Facebook, and we can, I can ask for more examples of this, and we can explore this. And we both at that point thought Sheldrake would not be interested. And so we went ahead with it. I started at that point doing my survey of my Facebook group and other groups on Facebook asking for accounts of this, of animal after death communications. And then when I was in the middle of that, Sheldrake wrote to Nam, saying, "Why don't we do this? Why don't we do it?" And he told him at that point, "Well, Jim Matlock is already doing it." And so that's how it started. That's how I got involved with this. And we decided that since we can have two samples of this, because it turns out that Sheldrake had a lot of these examples already of his, he just hadn't talked about them. They had been sent to him. That we have these two samples, we might as well compare them. So that's sort of how it started. And and I brought into, so in my survey, somebody wrote to me and said, "Look, if you're interested in this, I can help you." And so she got involved too. So we ended up with 5 authors for this afterlife communication study.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. And you had 445 accounts, didn't you, from your Facebook group and from Rupert's, I think, more older accounts that he'd collected previously.
That's right. Yeah, and from the literature too, because we also surveyed the literature on these after-death communications. So we ended up with in the after-death, the animal after-death communications paper, with more than just the 2 samples, more than just comparing my Facebook sample to Rupert's older sample that had come to him. But
really brilliant.
We then added this sample from the literature. We added a sample from a website. So we ended up with 4 different samples that we compared. Right.
Yeah. It's a brilliant sample size, 445.
Yeah.
Just before we kind of dive into more detail of this paper, just briefly on the end-of-life experiences paper, the one that got submitted to you for review. Do you remember any of the kind of examples of the accounts that came through with that one? And I don't have any coming to mind myself. I mean, I remember that some of them followed the idea that, for example, like a bird in its cage maybe is routinely left with the door open but stays in his cage, for example, and then totally out of the blue, for the first time ever, he leaves his cage and flies and lands on somebody in the family's shoulder or something, and is kind of shows affection, and then goes back to normal, and they're like, "What was all that about?" And then the next morning they wake up and he's dead, whatever. Right. And there was a few I think along those lines. There was some maybe where the kind of akin to a crisis apparition, where the dog or cat or whatever is kind of looking off into space, as if they're seeing somebody or something, and it's and they're having a kind of visceral reaction. So there was a few things like that. I don't know if anything else is jumping into your mind as I'm saying these, or
I mean, those are good examples of it. There's one so one of them, I'm trying to think, their terms and relate it to, but it's an example of this this thing where there's a sudden energy. Let me hold on to that. Let me come back. This will be a second case with the sudden energy. So this is a different one where there is one of the things that animals do will as they sense their death coming, they will remove themselves. I've seen this, with my own pets sometimes. And there was an example of a dog that went around to everybody and seemed to say goodbye, and then left the house, and it's like disappeared. Now, one of the things which they do in their paper is compare them to human, because what's really interesting is the comparison to the human things. And they found, although that's, as they point out in that paper, this is not something that we normally, I mean, humans close to death don't have that opportunity, right? I mean, they can't get up out of the hospital bed and go somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
But they found one from the Australian Aborigines, published back in 1956, which is very similar. The guy had gone to work, gone around all of his coworkers, basically said goodbye, and then they found him dead later that day.
Wow.
And there's also this energy spurt right before death, where they talk about animals that are really moribund, close to death, and then suddenly have this energy. This sort of similar to what you got in the in terminal lucidity, where you're close to death and all of a sudden there's this revival of consciousness. And we also, just as a segue then into after death communications, we collected a case that a woman, and this is one of the types of after death communication we'll be talking about, the tactile one. I think you mentioned visual. I mean, we'll run through the different types, but the tactile, which is where they're feeling. So a woman woke up during the night feeling like there was a cat on her bed. I mean, just on her, right? I mean, this is, cats do this, right? And they jump on you, and you jump on your bed, and if that happens while you're sleeping, you wake up, right? I mean, things wake you up. And so she woke up. Well, it turned out that the cat was on the bed, but on the other side of her husband, on the other side of the bed, and it was dead. It had been dead several hours. Now, before its death, it hadn't been on the bed. So it must have, before they went to bed, it hadn't been on the bed. So it looks like, and it couldn't, the body was on the bed. So clearly it had jumped up on the bed after they went to sleep. But before it died, because its body was already cold. It was, it clearly had died on the bed, having gotten there. So this is sort of a merger of the afterlife experiences to the end of life experiences, right? So at the end of the life, the cat had jumped on the bed, died, and then hours after the death had gone in spirit and gone back to
wild. You're reminding me as well of a couple of the other things that were in the end of life experiences paper I just mentioned just quickly. So you were talking about the surge and the terminal lucidity and things, and I read there was a couple of cases, I think, or a couple of accounts where the owners of the pet had kind of, as you were saying, very close to death, clearly not in good shape, so they call the vet and make the appointment for the following day or whatever.
And I kind of know what you're going to say. And the cats disappear. Yeah.
Or no, they wake up the next day of the appointment, and the cat's just finishing its breakfast. It's up and happy, jumping around, it's playing, it's life all in its eyes, and they're like, what is this? And so they cancel the appoint, and
right, and then it dies. Yeah. I know. Yeah, that was a funny one.
And then there was also just one last, and then I'm all over to you. You mentioned about the dog, I think, or some animal going around and saying goodbye to everybody, and it made me think of one of the ones from the paper where I think it was a dog. It had a previous owner. They couldn't take care of it. It'd been given to new owners, and anyway, when it was in its last days, it made a voyage, an exploration to go visit its previous owner, and apparently this dog had never been to that property, so it was using some kind of psi phenomena to navigate itself there, got there, said goodbye, left into the wilderness, and went off to die. And so you just reminded me of those two, which were just really fascinating. But anyway, please, back to you.
Yeah, and your examples bring up the other thing, and that is the psychic abilities of animals. I mean, this is something Sheldrake has written about too.
Yeah,
in his book.
I say, I have the
dogs that know when their owners are coming home. Right, he writes about a lot of this. He's done a lot of research on this. I mean, just like humans have ESP, so do animals.
Yeah, absolutely. So to talk more about the after death communications then, because that's the one that you've just had accepted to be published. You said it's probably going to be getting published probably sometime next spring, something like that.
That's right. It's going to be in their spring issue, and sometimes these things are late, but probably be March or April.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And we said there's 445 accounts in there, or yeah, accounts. There's loads of cats and dogs, obviously, as you would expect, because they're the animal that we have the closest relationships with. There was a few horses, a few birds, I think a llama, a spider. Probably there was some other, bizarre animals you might not necessarily expect to find in there, but a kind of good array, even if there was vast majority dogs and cats. But yeah, if we go through maybe some of the categories. So I've noted down the categories that you and Rupert and Michael Nahm and everybody et al. Categorize them into. So as you mentioned, visual apparitions and tactile apparitions. So let's start with, let's switch them and start with tactile, seeing as you already mentioned an example for the tactile apparitions. So could you just say a few words about what exactly a tactile apparition is? And if there's another example that pops to mind, feel free to say it. If not, no worries, and I'll kind of go on to another of these categories.
Okay. Well, the tactile is something what it sounds like. I mean, it's feeling, right?
Yeah.
But the most common tactile things are cats and dogs jumping onto beds. I mean, this is habitual activity for them, right? I mean, anybody who has a pet and is familiar with their cat, cats particularly, and dogs, if they're small dogs, I mean, will often jump onto the beds with you.
Well, mine's big and he'll jump up anyway.
Okay. So, I'm not surprised to hear that. They want to be with you, and so, they want to be with you after death as well as before, and so, in a way, it's doing habitual things, but it's also that sense of connection which persists.
And then, so visual apparitions. So that kind of is fairly.
Another type of tactile is cats, particularly brushing against legs and things like that. But again, sort of an habitual sort of thing. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely fine. So the visual apparitions, which I think is probably of all of these is one of the most self-explanatory. I think most people can understand, what a visual that you're seeing some kind of visual representation of the animal, right? Am I right?
Yeah, and one of the is, you see, what we're really interested in both, and they were interested in the ELE paper, and we're interested in the ADC paper, is how similar the animal sightings are to human sightings. So I think we need to also mention the human ones. So in human after-death experiences, apparitions are also very common.
Yeah.
Where people will see the apparition of their loved ones right after they die. And in animals too, it's the same sort of way. They see the animal, after it's died. And in fact, in both animal and human, they're the most common. The visual are the most common type. The visual and the tactile actually are the most common type in both human and animal apparitions. And and sometimes the people who see the apparitions don't know the animals are dead.
Yeah. Wow. And that's again same in the humans. And in some of those cases, which were kind of strange, is they'll see only a part of the animal, right?
That's right.
I think there was one. It was just the tail or something.
That's right. I mean, and again, that's with humans. I mean, once when I was working, I mean, I told this story about the ASPR. I was there as librarian and archivist back in the late 80s, and one of my professors there and the predecessors there in the library once looked up and saw the top half of a man, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And turned out it was Chester Carlson, actually. She was showing photographs. She was showing a series of photographs and said, "Is it any of these?" But obviously, I mean, it sort of takes you back. I mean, top half of somebody, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But I mean, they'll see just a tail or their, hind or something, some part of the animal without seeing the same thing. But it's similar to humans again.
Yeah. What about auditory apparitions? That's the third category.
Right. Cats meows, dogs bark, whatever, again, characteristic of them. But they're human, plenty of human auditory apparitions too.
Yeah. That's how common are they? They're quite rare. I think there were less cases in the auditory, right? That was.
No, they're less. They're fairly common, sort of middle range.
Okay.
They're not the least common. But with either humans or animals, but they're not as common as the visual and the tactile.
Yeah, and this is normally hearing like a meow or a familiar bark or meow or something like that.
With the animals, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So then dream visitations, which is something that's, obviously we know happens with humans. And we were just talking a little bit about dreams in part one of this. Dreams are a really fascinating area. There's so much that kind of relates back or is connected to in some way to dreams. And it seems there's so much possibility with dreams. It seems endless, almost unlimited. But yeah, what do you make of that? Have you got a few words to say about the dream visitations with animals?
Yeah, sure. Because one of the things that's interesting there is that although we do find them both in humans and animals, they're less frequent with animals.
Mm.
And that I should say this about the way we conducted our survey, our research here. Many of these studies of human ADCs use surveys. They use questionnaires. We used a different approach. We took people's accounts and then we coded them. So we looked at the accounts and then we went down ourselves, and brought out the salient details in them, without using questionnaires, which can direct attention to certain things. Right? It was just sort of an exploratory study, and so we didn't know what questions to ask yet, and so that's how we did it. And maybe that was part of the difference. We're letting people tell their stories without prompting them.
Yeah.
But there are many fewer examples of animals appearing in dreams than there are humans appearing in dreams, and yet we did have many examples of animals in dreams. And sometimes, and one of the things we talked about last time, is how dreams are not necessarily although dreams are not necessarily always realistic, right? We all know that about our dreams. They can be kind of crazy sometimes. So we don't know with some of these dreams what exactly is going on, and there can be they seem more realistic than regular dreams, but on the other hand, they often have sort of weird things going on, right?
Yeah.
One of the most curious dreams was a guy, I think it was a woman, she didn't, who was visiting our parents' house after a dog had died. She knew the dog, but wasn't there when the dog had died. So she was in their guest room, and she had this dream that was from the dog's point of view. That it was sort of from dog height beside the bed.
Yeah.
Do you remember this one?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, this one was really interesting.
So really interesting. I mean, she's like dog height beside the bed. She's the feeling of the dog, right? The image of her dad's wife flashes into her mind, and then everything goes blank. And it's sort of like, what happened here, So something like her consciousness is merging with the dog consciousness, and that became part of that, became her dream, right? But she doesn't see the dog. It's like inside, it's sort of weird. It's inside the dog. It's sort of a very weird sort of thing. But anyway, there's that. And in most of these, and sometimes the animals in the dreams will tell people things, right, that they didn't necessarily know, before. So again, it gets back into things that are interesting parapsychologically that you can actually sink your teeth into.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the next category was the sense of presence. So feeling somebody's presence, which again I know is something that happens with people very frequently, right? Like they report this, like that I felt he was. I felt. Well, simply what it says on the tin. I sensed his presence. I felt his presence,
right? And it happens with animals too, in the same way. Like one of the things that we have in the paper is, so a woman said she was always counting 3 dogs when she took them out for the walk.
Oh yeah.
Remember that one? She always counting 3 dogs, but there were only 2 live ones. The other one was dead, but it was somehow there. The presence was so strong that she was still counting it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there's a woman who said the same thing about her horse, that she felt the horse there, the horse's presence. She was out, working in the pasture, and the horse's walls, off on the other side, but she had a feeling that a horse was behind her. When she turned around, there wasn't a horse there.
Yeah. This sense of presence, it reminds me, and I'm just going to ask you quickly if you've come across a phenomenon that I recently discovered called third man syndrome, or third man syndrome, I think is what it's known as. Have you come across that?
I haven't, but it's very similar. It sounds at least very similar. And maybe by a different name. You want to describe that?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it's. I think it frequently happens with mountain climbers, but it seems to happen in all walks of life. People that are in a car crash or something, and it's basically one or more people just have this overwhelming sense that there is a third person or a second or whatever, another person with them that doesn't seem to be there. So I think Shackleton, the famous explorer Shackleton, maybe wrote about this. I think he might have been the first reference to it, where I think he said, for all of this, I'm paraphrasing badly, but for all of this, trek along this area, there were three of us, but every time it felt like there were four of us, but every time I looked, there were three, or some things like this. And apparently it's quite a common phenomenon, and it can sometimes include visual apparitions, can sometimes include, other types of apparition like this, like tactile or whatever, but in general it's this sense of presence, and it's a really overwhelming sense, and it's very comforting, and it allows people to feel, if they're climbing a mountain or climbing down from a mountain and they're very close to death, and in fact it's kind of maybe has some overlap with NDE as well, but yeah, this kind of presence that tells them everything's going to be okay, it guides them even the safest way off the mountain, or it's with somebody in a car crash and it stays there to kind of almost make them feel like they're, they have company, or they're not alone while the medics get to them and things like that. And anyway, I think it was my sister that mentioned it to me. Her partner's a climber, and I was really, fascinated by it, and I've been looking into it. But the more it seems, it's quite common. Anyway, it just made me think of that with the whole sense of presence thing.
Right. I mean, that's very similar to the woman who's walking the dogs and, always saw a third dog, right? These things come up with the animals, and not just with sense of presence. Sometimes they're visual, and they'll turn up very often as a warning, where somebody's out, and can be years after the dog has died, and all of a sudden they see the dog or another animal. They see this pet, and the dog, the vision, the apparition, warns them away from doing this or that, and it turns out that it was just in time to keep something from happening, and if not, they would have been killed.
Yeah. And at the same time, I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also sometimes it's like it's the opposite of that, in the sense that it's kind of like a reaffirming that they're making the correct decision or something. I think there might have been a case where they were getting another dog or another animal, and maybe the animal appeared to them in a sense to kind of reaffirm that, you're doing the right thing. You need to get this animal and look after this animal. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. You see that too. I mean, that's how people interpret it. Sometimes, I mean, I don't know if we want to get into reincarnation now, but sometimes sometimes these things, the way sometimes they're interpreted as reincarnations. Sometimes they're interpreted as the animals are showing up and guiding one to the animal, to a new pet, right? Mm-hmm. Now, within a reincarnation context, I can align those with what we call announcing dreams and other experiences, where with humans, the person, the apparition shows up, indicating that they plan to be reborn. So there's this sort of quasi thing. They're not always interpreted that way. People don't think of reincarnation first, and so they may interpret it in another way. But that's one way of understanding these, that particular type of appearance. Whether it's typically a visual apparitional appearance, but it can also be a sense of presence. Shortly before, to lead you, to help you find another pet.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is really interesting thought, and it kind of, I think, again, to show the correlation with the human cases, I'm reading, or I read recently, a book by Laura Lynn Jackson. You're probably familiar with her. She's a medium, a mental medium, very well known, one of the best known in the world, also very well verified through like the Windbridge Institute, through the Forever Family Foundation. And she has done readings with like Leslie Kane, for example, who wrote the book Surviving Death, and those accounts are just so compelling. Anyway, she's the first. Laura Lynn Jackson was basically the first medium that I kind of really took seriously, because a few years ago I was totally closed off to that. But anyway, in her book that I just finished, she was referencing the idea of like, if our partner passes away, our spouse, do they want us to, like find somebody else, or would they rather us, like wait for them or what have you? And there's this idea that it seems in almost every case, or in fact in every case, that they do want people to find somebody else, and they will actually try to influence in a way things to maybe try and put somebody in your path that's a good match for you or something like that. And again, I know this is getting away from like hard data and things like that a bit, but again, she's a very credible person who's doing what she's doing, and it's just that interesting kind of the correlation, or the similarities there, I guess is the better word for it. The idea that maybe the animal is doing the same thing, like right, reaffirming this particular pet that you're going to get for a reason. Not necessarily, maybe it's reincarnation, as you say, it could be, but it could also be that just like he feels that there's a good bond there, or what have you. And it made me think of the spouses with humans.
Right.
Which are just interesting. So the next category I have here is psychokinetic effect. So that came up in some of these cases.
Right. And that's really interesting. I mean, I probably need to step back and explain what that means, right?
Sure.
Because not all viewers are going to know what psychokinesis is, right?
Yeah.
Often abbreviated as PK, but it's mind over matter, right? It's the ability of the mind to act on the material world or on the body. I mean, it's what's used in psychic healing, but also stigmata, poltergeist, so that's the idea there. And it's we see this in this case. I mean, one of the examples we give in the paper, because I like this, is a nice example of the boy who was playing with his dog and threw his toy way up in the air. I guess the idea was the dog will jump up, right? He throws it up and the dog will jump up and catch it, but he threw it so high it caught on a power line and didn't come down again. Well, after the dog died, he apparently went and retrieved the toy, which then fell down.
Yeah.
Okay.
The kid went up to his mum or something, didn't he?
He crying and said, "This happened, right?"
Yeah.
I mean, you can sort of skeptically say, if the boy hadn't had the vision of the dog doing that, you could say, "Oh, this is just by chance. This happened." But there are a very common one is with these cats jumping on the bed. Sometimes people will feel that the covers being pulled, or things like that, or they'll feel with dogs too, the pet jumping on the bed, they'll feel the mattress depress, and sometimes if they'll wake up, if this happens while they're sleeping. If they dream about it, they'll wake up and the bed is warm where they dreamed, or where the spirit cat or dog was supposed to have been lying. So all of those are sort of effects of on the material environment, right, brought about by a mind, in this case a discarnate mind.
Yeah, fascinating. Then olfactory apparition, which again is one that I spoke to. Do you know Lloyd Auerbach?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I've spoken to Lloyd a couple of times, and I think in our second conversation, definitely in the second conversation, maybe in the first as well, he briefly mentioned this, but he talked about an apparition of somebody he used to know that transitioned, that passed away. And it was an olfactory. It was he smelled like the smell of, I think it was like cigarettes and maybe mixed with kind of cologne of this person. Either way, I can't remember the exact smell, but it was, to him, it was this guy coming to say a goodbye. And then after this experience, I think he contacted some of his friends who also knew this person, and Or maybe just as he was about to, they called him and said, "Oh, but this just happened to me," and they're all kind of like, "No way, me too." Basically the same time, and basically the same experience. And I've heard multiple accounts of it actually in humans, like where you just kind of have that smell of, yeah, maybe they were a smoker, maybe they were, maybe they, I don't know, maybe their perfume in particular, maybe they were a drinker and you smell the alcohol. I don't know. It's not always, I guess, what we would want to be, what we'd want to come back smelling of. But there you go. Things work in strange ways, don't they, with this?
Right. Something is characteristic of the person. And in the same way with the animals, characteristic smells, that you've got, that they show up as apparitions. But there's something else there that you just mentioned, and that is the collectivity of some of this. Like that when that several people had the same experience. Same thing with animals. Yeah. That more than one person will have an experience, and not necessarily in the same modality. So one person will see something and another person smells something and comes out that way. Yeah. Another thing, let me get this in here too. Animals will react to, living animals, pets, will react to the deceased, the ones, sometimes at the same time as people are seeing them.
Yeah.
Right? So you get the collectivity that way too.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that idea that if a human either seeing or smelling and at the same time as an animal seemingly reacting to something,
right,
yeah.
I mean, either actions or vocalizations or something, they act as if they're seeing something bizarre.
Yeah. Well, we know all about, we don't know all about it, but we're very aware of animal body language, and there's lots of little things, even if it's not a major reaction, like you can see things with the hairs on their back or their ears, or lots of little things like that. Tilt of the head, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Or with cats arching their backs. Yeah, all sorts of things.
Yeah. Can you think of any of the examples of the olfactory apparitions from the paper? I'm kind of drawing a blank on it. I think it was one of the categories with the fewest as well, the fewest cases accounts.
Yeah, it is with both humans and animals. Interestingly, there are fewer olfactory apparitions than anything else in any of the other modalities. So the most common visual and least common, olfactory, with both humans and animals. For some reason, I'm thinking of a tactile with a bird, but
go for it.
It's tactile, but not whether the bird that somebody felt pecked them on the forehead.
Yeah.
So I believe there's an olfactory with the horse. And I'm not. I should have brought that paper up. Well, anyway, that's the idea that a smell of them, a characteristic smell, is then tells somebody that they're there. And the other thing to get in here is that when these things happen, they're not alone. I mean, you can get olfactory along with auditory, along with visual in the same case, right?
Yeah, in the sense of presence or whatever. Yeah,
in the sense of presence and it can all, in different combinations, right? So it's not just that there's that the afterlife communication comes in one modality, it can often come in several different modalities at the same with the same animal, right? And over time, it's not just these things happen once; they'll happen repeatedly, very often, and collectively. And it's the same thing with human apparitions. I mean, some of them are collective, some of them are not, some of them are repetitive, and some of them are not. And so.
Yeah. And I should say, you made me think of something now as well, is that I think, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, as always, that's just a thing that we could just leave that on the table forever. But in terms of the when these happen, with humans, these things tend to happen very quickly, I think, after the death, normally. And basically, in short, the further we get away from the death, the less frequent these become. And that was the same with the animals, right? Most of these were within, I think, either there were some around the moment of the death or at the moment of the death, like concurrent with it, and then there was a high number within hours or a few days, and then the number kind of gradually goes down. I can't remember where the big cutoff might have been. There might have been a big drop after like a few weeks or a couple of months or something.
Yeah, it's something like that. I mean, it's something like that. It's actually, I believe, as early as a week where you start
Yeah.
seeing a real decline. But then certainly after a month, you have many fewer cases. You have some.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we're going to be looking at in our second paper, our follow-up paper, statistically, is that there seems to be a correlation between the animals seen early after death being associated with grief. The person who sees them is grieving, right? And so they seem, the person feels like they're seeming to come to them to help assuage their grief. That's how they feel it.
Yeah.
Then the further out that we get from death, you have the animals showing up at moments of crisis, or at moments very similar to what you're talking about with the third man, but that wasn't always crisis, right? But anyway,
Not always, but yeah, normally,
yeah, but sometimes they were. But what we see is the animals will show up at moments of crisis, helping to avert crisis,
yeah,
or warning. Sometimes they show up shortly before a human person dies. Also, sometimes shortly before another animal dies. But I'll get into that in a second. But or they'll show up when a person is in the hospital. So it's like to give them support.
Yeah, yeah, it's brilliant. Like they're still supporting us afterwards.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, and this is why I want to look at it statistically, it's whether or not they support
that's our
us.
interpretation. Yeah.
Well, it's our interpretation, but you see, but to get away from that or to raise questions about, is it simply, can we be imagining all of this? Grief seems to be associated with short after death, and then stress, one form or another, seems to be associated with longer time after death.
Yeah. So we got just a couple of these categories left that I wanted to just touch on quickly. So telepathic message was the next one. So these are after-death communications that come along with some kind of telepathic message.
Yeah. Where the animals seem to speak. I mean, and sometimes, if you think about it, everything that goes on between discarnates and discarnates and embodied people has to be telepathic, right? And it's the same way with these animals, right? But the thing is that what's interesting here is that sometimes the human percipient sort of translates this into their subconscious, their brain or whatever, translates this into human words. So the animals are imagined in dreams to be speaking in human words, conveying it. Other times they just have the sense that the animal is conveying this thought to them, right? Well, all of us who have pets, I guess on occasion have had the sense that we've telepathically been able to communicate with our animals. But anyway, it's that sort of thing, that sort of rapport. And it is interesting. It is, we get it most often in dreams, but not always. It can be part of these other types of experiences also, where there's sort of this conveyance of information.
Yeah, in this paper, I think the dreams were separate to the telepathic message category. Is that right? Like, because you didn't have any that went into two categories, I think.
Well, we categorize them differently because the telepathic thing is not an ADC type, whereas the dream is.
Yeah.
So the telepathic is just something that we'll see across types. Right.
It's like an extra element.
It's an extra element that we see, but it's not related necessarily to a specific type, and it's not a type of ADC.
Yeah. So then deathbed visitations.
Well, again, it's not a type of ADC. That's an element. That's an end of life experience.
Yeah.
That's an end of life experience. But people do see animals sometimes as part of that. And they also see animals sometimes in NDEs. In fact, there's an NDE account where somebody's deceased pets, appeared and where the pets were the ones to say, "It's not your time. Go back to your body." Anyway, but the deathbed apparitions is separate from the end of life experience. Separate from the ADCs, the after death communications that we dealt with in this paper.
Yeah, but it was in the paper. I think it must have been as one of the, kind of additional elements in the same way with telepathic message, and electrical current, surge of energy, that kind of thing. I think it was in there.
Yeah, because we did get just the sort of accounts of that.
Questionable accounts.
Right, the borderline. Yeah, because we do mention some of the borderline things, and the reason that we put some in borderline and questionable is that it's not clear what is going on there, or whether it really happened. The communication really happened after death. I mean, and one of the types of experience that we put there is ones that could plausibly be explained by super psi or simple psi, right? Where it's the human percipient who, like one of them was with a snake. A guy who went to the zoo a lot and had this rapport with the snake, dreamed of this snake. And because he had an experience where he dreamed about one of his relatives just before he died or after he died, he realized that was probably what was going on with the snake. And so he went back to the zoo and sure enough, the snake had died at the same time. And so, that type of thing. Well, you can't really be sure. I mean, is the snake contacting the guy who saw it, or is it the guy you don't know, and so that's the case with a lot of these death coincidence. And that may be more of what you're thinking of, the death coincidence, rather than, the death coincidence cases where animals will show up right when they die, but when people don't realize it. I mean, people don't realize that they're dead. They see their animals, and later turns out that the animals died right at that time. Related to that, and this is what goes back to me, I'm jumping in now with it because it relates to something you said earlier, and maybe that sometimes with the human cases, there's this sort of a traveling connection where somebody sees someone who died in a different place. You didn't know that, and the person traveled. The same thing with animals. The animals will sometimes be seen not in the place where they died, the place where the percipient is now living, okay, and didn't know about the death, but the animals somehow found them, right, and appear in some way to them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. In the borderline and questionable kind of category that you used, so I think you had 3 categories. So you just mentioned one, the living agent psi, which is basically the super psi hypothesis that any of these phenomena can and are done by our own psychic abilities. Right. So then there was photographic anomalies and signs and synchronicities. So first of all, what were the photographic anomalies? I can't really recall exactly what that meant. So can you kind of explain that?
Right. Okay. So with the photographs, that's something that we put in the borderline questionable category in this first paper, and it's something we left for our follow-up paper, which will get more into the interpretations. That is, what do we make of all of this? In the first paper, we were trying to show the similarities with humans. What do we make of all these similarities with humans? And what do we make of the very clear suggestions in all of this that animals survive death too and communicate with people in the same ways? So there are a couple of reasons why we saved the photographic anomalies. One is that with all photographic anomalies, there's always questions about, can this be done by super psi? Are these fake? And all this type of thing. So we thought it was just better to hold them off. But we will get into them because some of these are interesting. Like people who take pictures and an apparitional animal shows up in this picture. You have all these live animals, but you have the same type of thing that you get in this sort of spirit photography that's been so often debunked, but maybe not always, that type of thing. So it's harder to with digital photography that we have now, it's harder but you can take that in Photoshop and so, you have to take it at somebody's word if you don't have the original image that has not been photoshopped, right? So for all those things, and that takes discussion, so that's why we left it all out. But so we have examples of that. We also have an example of my most interesting example that we'll bring into this other paper is of a non-speaking autistic woman who seems to have seen something, and she communicates through a letter boy.
Okay.
But her mother, without seeing the deceased dog, felt the presence of the deceased dog sort of bouncing around and took pictures of where she felt the dog was. Okay. One of the pictures that she took, an extremely striking picture, also shows her autistic daughter with this ghastly expression on her face, looking at this, which in the photograph shows up as an orb.
Yeah.
So the mother didn't see the apparition. She didn't see the orb. But when she took the picture, it has an orb. And then she got the daughter, looking right at the orb with this ghastly expression.
Wow. And the daughter then said through her letterboard or whatever
that she had actually seen it, right? That she had seen it, right?
And to her, it appeared as a dog, not
and
it
appeared as a dog. That's right, not an orb.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, but it's not something we put in this first paper because it's just to talk about it, to analyze it, it's just too much. It's not.
What paper is that going to be in?
Well, it'll be in the same journal. I mean, all of these are in the same journal, the Journal of Scientific Exploration, because they're all part of a series. Yeah. The first series was the Sheldrake Nam, and the other person, I keep saying is a third, and that's so it's Rupert Sheldrake, Pam Smart, who is his assistant. I
thought it was,
and then Michael Nam, the three of them, and then the second one is me and Beth Hilton, who's helping me, and then the other three. And then after that, because we were right, Michael and I were sort of right that Rupert would prefer not to get into the implications of animal survival, and he prefers not to. He's comfortable with this first paper, but he didn't want to get into it. He said, I'm already associated with so many controversial issues, I don't want to get into it. So Beth and I are doing and then Michael dropped out too, because he had other things he needed to do. So it's going to be Beth and I on the follow-up paper. But that's the one that's going to be the interpretive thing, where we get into the really interesting issues of, are we really talking about life after death here for animals? Again, what does it mean that the same things that we see with non-human animals we see with humans? We're animals too, after all, and so what does that say about being an animal, right? And so how far back can we take this? And you mentioned the spider earlier, and it's very, very interesting when you start thinking of this in this phylogenetic way.
Yeah, and like you're saying, how far back can we take it? I got a question about that soon. The last category in the borderline and questionable stuff, signs and synchronicities, which, again, a year or two ago, I kind of probably would have scoffed at the idea of that. But obviously being on this journey, being aware of, learning so much more about everything and seeing data, that I became more open-minded to the idea. As I mentioned, I read Laura Lynn Jackson's book called Signs, which was all about this kind of idea. And I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal but compelling, evidence out there that people do experience signs and synchronicities at incredibly bizarre and compelling times. I think the timing is often the most interesting element, at least in the human cases of signs and synchronicities. But does a case come to mind from the animals with this for you? Yeah,
and again, it's very similar to the humans. I mean, with humans also, I mean, the signs are often appearances of birds or, butterflies. Those are the most common ones, right?
Maybe on the 1 year anniversary of the death of something like that, somebody, or the birthday, or
things like that. And people, so it's very easy, to see how those could be overinterpreted, right? They could just be coincidences. And so that's why they're not really taken all that seriously most of the time. And they're not always included in these surveys of human ADCs, but they do show up. And, and the people who look at it more broadly, they do show up, like the Guggenheim book that introduced the term after death communication, ADC, has some examples. And I've seen others, in books about these, but they don't show up in the questionnaire surveys so much because they're not asked about. I mean, it's the same thing with the animals. I mean, a woman said that after her dog died, a dove showed up on her
Mm.
porch.
Oh yeah, and she said, I think she said that she'd never seen a dove in this area, and that that there hadn't been birds flying around
Yeah,
for
because it was
weeks or
too
something
early
like
or
that.
something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so she thinks the dove was her dog. Well, so we put it in borderline, maybe, maybe not. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
always. So we put it in borderline questionable. Um, Now there are some of these signs that where it becomes more interesting is when they appear along with some of these other categories too.
Mm, yeah.
Okay, but that's when it becomes a little bit more interesting. But yeah, a lot of it is just this, this timing, or you know, or seeing somebody's talking about it, rainbows, right? Um, Rainbows are somehow associated with her deceased pet, and then she started seeing these rainbows, or they saw these rainbows after the um, the pet had died, or a shooting star rather than a rainbow. It could be either one, but in this case, it was
Hmm.
the shooting star. He had never seen shooting stars before, saw
Yeah,
see
yeah,
shooting stars on that same night. It takes this as a significant sign. We don't know. Who
yeah.
knows?
No,
So,
no. And the way I think of that is, if they are, if they are in fact a sign, it's obviously, as you say, on an individual case by case basis, it's incredibly hard to say. I do think over the whole body, probably some of them are. But the way I think of it is that, yeah, if these things are a sign, so say a rainbow or a shooting star, if that is in fact a sign from somebody or some being, or what have you, a pet, a form of pet. I think a lot of people, the easy way to think about that, the default way we think about that is, so you're saying that your deceased relative or pet created that rainbow and put that rainbow there. And to me, that always just seems so illogical. But when I think about it differently, I think, okay, so there was going to be a shooting star there or a rainbow there anyway. It's just this discarnate entity compelled you to look in that
yeah,
direction at the moment that it was going to happen. And for me, that's much easier to kind of digest and be like, okay, it would take a lot less, influence and ability to just kind of convince me to go to my window and glance up there than it would to manifest an entire rainbow or shooting star. So it's just one way that I've kind of able to think about it a little bit differently.
yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's very good. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So do you think that all animals are having a conscious experience? How far, you mentioned it a minute ago with like the spider, and how far down we can go, like, do you see any lines or limits? Do you think this kind of, yeah, again, is it all animals that can have an experience that can survive death? What about plants? Where do we
Right,
stand with all of these things?
right. I mean, and that's sort of that's where it sort of goes, right? Is it all
Yeah.
life forms, not just animals? And how far down the animal chain do we go before we get this? Um, Well, as I mentioned briefly at the end of our last conversation, I think consciousness probably evolved,
Yeah.
right, to work with the organisms as our physical organisms have evolved. Um, and so probably you know, so even if there's consciousness in everything, and I'm also a panpsychist, so I think there's probably some sort
Hmm.
of consciousness in everything. Um, that doesn't mean it's the same type of consciousness in everything,
No,
right?
no.
And so at some point, consciousness developed so that it can have these experiences. But obviously, it was before mammals, right? Because we have these other
Hmm.
things too. We have the snakes, we have, the spider. And the spiders, by the way, is not our case. That was one that we got from a website. But we included it because it was part of what we surveyed, and it was interesting. I mean, the spider was one that was a house spider that was kept as a pet, kept in an aquarium. The guy in cleaning the aquarium accidentally squashed the spider. The spider died, and then after that, he saw he saw this this sort of apparition of something coming down, you know, and it's sort of a round thing, and then going back up suddenly,
Yeah.
uh, so uh, very soon after the spider was squashed. So,
Yeah.
um, So here we're dealing with insects, right? How far back does it go? We don't know, obviously, but it could go way back, and so we don't know where that threshold is. Now, one of the things that I would like to look at, if we get a large enough sample size, that I think I'm beginning to see, is that the higher animals, particularly mammals, and particularly cats and dogs, are
Yeah.
more likely to appear in a variety of different modalities. So we'll see them visual, auditory, olfactory, all of these together. Um,
Hmm.
Whereas with other kinds of animals, like the snake, it's only in the dream, and so forth, and the spider, it's only this visual thing. It's not repetitive, it's not collective, it's not cross modality like this. So I think if we get a large enough sample where we can really examine this, we maybe begin to see that type of difference.
Hmm. And you're going to collect the sample through your Facebook group, through the literature, through other means. If anybody watching or listening has an account of this, of something along these lines, feel free to reach out either to me or to Jim. If you reach out to me, I can put you in touch with Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that, because so in our follow-up study, we're collecting counts from Facebook, we're counting
Hmm.
counts from Reddit this time,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
we've also got another category of other, in which we're collecting all of these other things that come to us through email, through responses to things like this. And Sure, yeah, we'd be very happy to hear about these, and we can use them. And even if they come to us too late for these studies, this is an interesting enough thing that we may very well
Yeah.
eventually write a book. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and we'll get the papers out first.
Yeah.
So
And I'm sure I speak for you too when I say it's always interesting to hear them, even if you're not going to turn it into anything. I love hearing about people's experiences like that, and it just, you kind of build a picture. It helps to build this picture.
It does. And you see, another study we're going to do is animals and NDEs, because we've heard of those and we think there are a lot more. And if we just ask
Wow.
for them or survey for them, we'll find them. And then also
Yeah.
animal reincarnation. So we're going to have a
Yeah.
whole series, like 5 related papers here about animals,
Yeah.
that
That's
get
brilliant.
into the issues of animal after death.
Yeah.
And I think it's, the thing is, starting with our ELE paper and now our ADC paper, these are the first papers that deal with this in an academic scientific journal. It's never been dealt
Yeah.
with before in a seriously like this.
Yeah, exactly. It's groundbreaking. I feel like the same that you felt when the first paper came across your desk, like that kind of like, wow, yeah.
Yeah.
That's when I first saw the end of life experiences paper and first read that, I was totally gripped, and I'm so happy to hear that there's more. And just to kind of add on to what I was saying about, if people have an experience that they want to share, please do that, even if it's only like 2 or 3 lines written down.
That's right.
Like, even if you only have fragment, like it all builds to this body of evidence.
That's right.
The 445 cases in the paper are not. Most of them are quite short and sweet, right? Because people don't think to make contemporaneous notes at the moment that it happens, and so you kind of take what you can get, right? Most of the time.
Right, and they're writing. Remember, these are accounts written often in social media, so you don't go on for so long. Now, some of Rupert's things were much longer, and we didn't quote those because we want short and sweet, right, for the paper.
Yeah,
it's just much easier to read, and so we looked for ones. We selected the accounts that were shorter. But some people wrote at much greater length, and sometimes if they're in more involved cases, that you need greater length to describe them. But that's still is part of our database. It's part of the statistical analysis, and so all that's important. Even if we don't quote the case.
Yeah. So maybe you can just talk briefly. I know we're not going to go into detail in this area for now, because you're still, you're compiling the accounts, and you're going to go through them, and you're going to work on the paper and everything. And we're going to do this again in the future, and we will deep dive on this area. But just briefly, the animal reincarnation, the intra-species reincarnation, where it's kind of a dog passing away and coming back to the same person or family or whatever as a new puppy.
The intra-species, right, as opposed to transmigration, which is a cross species. I can, we're still collecting these accounts, but I've read a lot of them. And we haven't analyzed this yet, so I can't talk about it at the same level as I can talk about the other things. But some of them are very interesting. And we do see, again, we see patterns in these that are very similar to the human patterns.
Yeah.
And this is one of my interests in the animal ADCs and ELEs, because I'm a reincarnation researcher. And so this is in a way a departure from me, but it's a departure because it leads into this issue of animal reincarnation, which is of interest to me because it feeds into this theoretical issue of where consciousness comes from, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how some, and when reincarnation began, right? It began with life. Then that means that all forms of life reincarnate. That's the implication. But it also suggests that there's been some evolution in consciousness, that and that maybe consciousness evolved to work with bodies. I mean, and maybe consciousness had something to do with the evolution of the body too. We can get into that area.
Yeah.
So all of those are reasons to be interested in the animal reincarnation accounts, although they are simply accounts. And I keep using the word account, and maybe this is a good time to explain the difference between account and a case, is the way we use it. A case, the way I talk about it, is something that's been investigated. It's a case study, like most of the human reincarnation stuff. It's a case study. We go out and we talk to people, and we can, we look for documents, supporting documents. It's more than simply collecting an anecdote, right? It's more than just something, a story. With the animals, it's you can't talk to them in the same way, right? You can't go interview the animals, not in the same way, at least. And so, you can interview their owners, you can interview their people, and talk to them about what they've experienced, right? And what they have seen that suggests that their pets reincarnated.
Yeah, and photographic and video evidence might, in some cases,
can help with that
useful
too sometimes, in the same way as it does with the ADCs. But still, the accounts are much more anecdotal than they are with the human accounts, because you can't, and so that's why I call the animal stuff accounts.
Yeah.
Versus cases. That's the distinction I'm making. That's why I keep saying accounts on these. So anyway, with the reincarnation accounts, some of them are very interesting because they have signs that are very similar to human cases in this case, like behaviors. Okay, we don't have animals remembering things that we can verify. We do have animals behaving in ways that are very reminiscent of deceased animals, in the same way that we find in the human reincarnation cases, that not only are there past life memories, there are behaviors that are carried
like
over.
Quirky behaviors, I should obviously emphasize, because it's not, we're not just talking about a dog like trying to hide its bone or something like,
or something like that. We're talking about quirky behaviors that are specific to a deceased animal, that another animal of the same species later, coming to that person's life later, exhibits. And so that's what gives the idea. And when you see this, when it's not just one behavior, when it's a series of behaviors, you start saying, oh, well,
it's actually really exciting to think about this. It's really like, I'm like, wow, I'm like thinking of all the possibilities that maybe we're going to find animal, or maybe you're going to find animals that they say, yeah, my previous animal was terrified of the water, and now this dog is terrified.
We see that too. There's the same sort of phobias. We see announcing dreams involving animals. We see all the same type of signs we see with human communication we're seeing with animals.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to, hopefully that, do you think that one might be next year, that paper?
Yeah, probably next year, because it takes us time to go through this. So we're working on the follow-up to the ADC paper now, the interpretive one. And after that, we'll do the NDEs. And then we'll get to the animal, the reincarnation. So it'll be down the road, because not only does it take time to collect and interpret and analyze the data, it takes time to write the paper and then go to the review process and the publication process. So it gets all drawn out. To give you an example of how long it can take, I was sent the ELE paper, the Sheldrake Nam ELE paper, for review in December of last year. I started working on it in December and January. Okay. It's not going to be published until March.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all the research, writing, review, publication took over a year in that case,
Yeah.
and we haven't even
Yeah.
started working on the reincarnation yet.
Lots to come though. Lots of exciting stuff to come. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to a future paper on plants. No, I'm kidding. I know that's too far we're not going to be able to find any similarities there, but it's a really interesting idea, the interesting thought about, again, as we were saying, how deep does this go? Because I know there are some interesting things with plants, they can kind of communicate between each other and stuff like that.
Well, there's that.
Sorry.
And let me tell you something that's really, really interesting. Really, yeah. I think this is really interesting. We had next to our house, we had an aging maple tree.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so close to the house, it was beginning to fail, and we had to take it out. Before that happened, another tree that turned out to be a maple tree began to grow in the gutter. Mm-hmm. Somehow it got through the gutter guard and started growing up in the gutter.
Wow.
Okay. I had this taken out of our gutter and put in our yard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we now have the maple tree that apparently, I mean, how are you supposed to interpret this? It seems like the dying tree gave us another tree.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is just like bizarre stuff, but how are you going to understand it? I mean, is this like total chance?
Yeah.
I mean, have you anybody ever heard of this? I mean, it's like, so yeah, no, weird things can happen with plants too.
Yeah, and I think they can like warn each other. Some plants, obviously not all, not all the same. Some can like warn each other of predators and things like that, and through the ground. And some of them, like I can't remember the names of all these plants. I did speak to an expert on plants ages ago and asked him about some of these things. But there's like some of them have new like networks underground where all their roots are kind of connected, and it's like thousands of trees all connected. And they like if there's a fire on one corner, like they all become aware and they all adjust like their whatever. Something to try and minimize the risk that they all burn out. And even if I don't know, there's some fascinating stuff with plants.
There is. You mentioned also not only underground, mm-hmm. Some of them will communicate through the air, through things given off in the air. So the plants in an area can communicate that way too. But it's fascinating.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, I think, that when an animal shows up just before another animal dies, and I think you said you wanted to come back to it. So did you want to just say a few words about that?
Sure. I mean, we hear about this with, this is something we hear about with humans, right? I mean, particularly with the deathbed apparitions. I mean, that's what they are, right? A human seems to see, the apparition of coming to meet them. Well, sometimes in some of these bizarre cases, humans see the apparitions of their deceased pets showing up just around the time that another pet is going to die.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems logical then to deduce that the deceased pet is showing up to welcome the dying one.
Or to let the human know that
or both.
It's going to be taken care of.
Or both.
Or both.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Fascinating. Another thing you kind of mentioned earlier briefly, you said there was a case of interspecies reincarnation that even though you weren't convinced by it, you were kind of having a hard time shaking it totally from your mind, and it was intriguing to you. Somebody who had a previous life as a pig.
Well, that's what he thinks.
Was there any other details that you found interesting about that?
Well, I mean, the details are what I found interesting, and I need to go back and get more of the details. But he's a vegan, first of all. He refuses to eat meat. But that doesn't, that's to make consistent, but that doesn't really tell you anything. But he has this image memory of being in a small cage, and it was a factory. It was a kept pig, not a free roaming pig, and there were other things about that, and I think there were other things that were really intriguing about his memory that you don't usually get in these claims to remember to be an animal, because as I was explaining when we talked about this and the other one is that most of the time there's not really any detail given, or if there is, then it's easily explainable in other ways, like sort of imagination. And so this was intriguing, and also it's intriguing because pigs are mammals. They're very intelligent mammals, and some pig organs are similar enough to human organs that they can be transplanted into human bodies. And so, if you get that level of compatibility, maybe the consciousness can be compatible enough that there can be reincarnation between species. So yeah, that's why I have an open mind about it. But as we'll talk about later, when we really get into the animal reincarnation stuff, and I have more stuff to share with you about it, I'm skeptical that it's a regular thing. I think it's a highly unusual thing. But it does come up. People do have claims of remembering themselves as animals, or more often thinking their animals remind them as their human loved ones, and so think that the human love, you get both things. But they're not all that convincing, most of them. So and then there are other issues too, about what you would expect in terms of how about developmental delays and other things, if that were to happen, that you don't see really. And so, but that's something I need to get back to this case and learn more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you remember any name or anything like that I could use as kind of try and find it, or if not, just send it to me next time
let me talk to him first, and see whether.
He's somebody you're talking to. Okay, right.
Right. Somebody contact me about something else, and so I don't think I should give the details, but I don't think you would mind talking about it. No. I don't think you mind my talking about it in this general way, but I don't want to, particularly live, but even before talking to him, I don't want to even in the background give you that info.
No, not at all. I understand. I wasn't sure if it was a case that you'd come across online or something like that was already public. That's all. That's why.
No, it's not public. No. It's okay. One, and it's not even online. It was.
Well, I'll look forward to hopefully hearing more about it from you soon in the future. One other thing I wanted to ask you, we haven't really touched on it much. I mean, we've referenced it a few times, the idea of mediumship. We referenced it a couple of times in our first, the part 1, and in this, not so much in this part actually. However, I just wanted to touch on the idea of animals coming through mediums in people's, sitting with a medium. Again, this is something that would have sound totally off the wall to me a few years ago, but somehow I'm asking you this question with a straight face. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Have you come across many accounts of that?
I haven't looked at that. I believe that there are some, but you see, with the I'm pretty sure that there are some, and if you go looking for them, you'll probably find them. But the communication will be telepathic, right? And then the medium is like communicating that in words. The animals aren't speaking English. They're not speaking French. They're not speaking any language, human language. But they have the thoughts, and the thoughts are then what is communicated at a subconscious level, and then is interpreted then by the mind, by the brain, by the human brain, and then the medium gives that out. There are some animal mediumistic things like that. Also, another thing you hear about is human mediumistic communicators saying that they're with their animals, and so they're seeing that. You get that also. But does that answer?
Yeah, I mean, you haven't gone into it in too much detail, but you're aware that it's something that seems to happen, but you can't verify either way, which I totally understand.
And that actually would be another angle to look at all this. Animals and mediumship, right? After we do the NDEs.
It would also be interesting to take somebody that has reported some of these after death communications or something, and somebody that's never sat with a medium or whatever, and maybe you get them to remotely communicate through, with a medium, maybe through you or through a third party, and see if anything comes through while you're recording the whole thing that lines up with the after death communication. Maybe the medium, is going to come through and say, oh yeah, so you're probably talking to me now because your dog gave you this after death communication a year ago, and you reported it, and but again, it could be super
I'll give you an example of this. It just came in my Facebook group today, as a matter of fact. Somebody in South America, didn't give me the country. It would have been in northern South America, I think. This was actually interesting. This is a human. This is actually human, not animal. But she had this experience, and then met a shaman or a medicine man who talked about it. Yeah, but it's not animal, and that's a human thing. But yeah, I mean, the point is that yeah, you can get psychics and mediums that can pick up on this stuff in the way that you're suggesting, and so it is type of experiment that could be done.
Yeah. There's so much potential, and I like I said before, I really look forward to where it's going to go. Your next paper is going to be trying to unravel all of the data that was in the first paper, right? And so it's going to be exploring the idea: do they survive death? Where do you stand on that right now? And again, not a scientific answer. Right.
I think it's very clear that they do. I mean, the only two alternatives are that this is all imaginary, everybody's making this up, it's all coincidence and all that, and super psi, and I don't see any basis for either of them. So the only conclusion that we really can reach is that there is animal survival, just as I believe that there is human survival. And I think the reincarnation cases provide a lot of evidence that reincarnation is too. So to me, that's where I'm going with it. But we need to take it through these steps, and we need to look at these possibilities and show why they don't work.
Yeah, absolutely. No. That's so. This has been brilliant. I've loved this conversation. I obviously love animals and love the idea of this. Again, it's all kind of new to me. Like a couple of years ago, I'd never given any serious thought to whether animals survive death. But here we are. And here you are out collecting the evidence.
Yeah, that's right.
And collating it for us. So thank you so much. And I, along with many others, will wait with bated breath. I'll put the link to the end of life experiences paper in the description here, and hopefully in the future when the next one is published, the after death communications, I'll be able to re-add the link to this. Last thing for today.
Okay, let me just add this one thing, that they will be in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, which is an open access journal, which means that when it's published, it'll be free on the web. You can just go to it. It's not behind a paywall. And it's the Journal of Scientific Exploration, which is what you need to remember. That's where the ELE paper, End of Life Experience paper, was published. That's where this one will be published, and where the next one will be published, and also where we'll send the reincarnation one. The near-death experience one will send to a near-death journal. But the Journal of Scientific Exploration will have the basic ones in this series.
Yeah, brilliant. Is there anything that you feel we haven't covered? Is there anything relating to these animal phenomena that you wanted to mention that I haven't asked you about, or anything like that?
Not that I can think of offhand. I mean, as I was thinking of things that we needed to get to, you got to them. So at this point, no, I don't have anything in my mind. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, then all I'll say is, if you have any last words, any words of wisdom, words of encouragement, whatever it might be, that you want to say to people that have watched or listened.
Well, I guess
it could even be a reminder to send you their cases.
Right. I mean, that's what I was going to say. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity to ask people, appeal, for more accounts, because I'm sure there are going to be listeners, viewers who have some, and so and they can send them either to you or to me, and I should give out my email address for that purpose, which is jgmatlock, MATLOCK, @yahoo.com, and you can put that also on that.
Perfect.
Or if they're on Facebook, they can come to my Facebook group, which is again, it's a reincarnation group, but I'm glad to hear about these things there. Signs of Reincarnation, exploring Signs of Reincarnation Experiences and Research is the name of my Facebook group. So,
and again, link in the description for anybody that's interested.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So those are the ways to contact me, or they contact you, and you can pass it on.
Yeah.
But thank you. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. I mean, again, as we've said a couple of times, like the more people that talk about this, the more we share this,
The more
and the more we study this, the better. It's all going to snowball, and eventually we'll know so much more than we know now.
And I think it's true of all the topics you take on.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Like these are all topics that have a certain amount of stigma or taboo attached to them in the mainstream, and there's no need for that.
No, there's
we can
not.
look at them.
Yeah.
We can look at them with a straight face, and we can talk about them. It doesn't mean we believe in everything. It doesn't mean we're getting carried away and just like, oh yeah. But we can take it seriously, and we can look at the evidence, and we can assess that.
And that's the key thing: looking at the evidence. Looking at the case data, looking at the evidence. We can think in all sorts of different. We need to, we need to think widely about the possibilities, but we need to always come back to the evidence. And that's really crucial. That's key.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, wishful thinking, a lot of people might see our animal after death communications. That's just wishful thinking. But hopefully people will watch it and listen to it and have their mind opened to the potential reality.
And once the paper comes out, I mean, you talked about your reaction to it, it was similar to my reaction to seeing the end of life experiences with it.
Yeah.
And I was acquainted. I mean, I was acquainted with these types of things, right? I didn't realize how many of them there are. And how many different phenomena there are, and how similar they are to human cases. I just had a general impression about it, but until I got into this, I did not realize those things.
No, not me neither. And I've heard a few cases in the last few months of people not related to the death phenomena, but related to animals in terms of psi and things like that. Interesting things. And I've had a few of my people that watch the channel commenting, like just showing how interested they are in things that related to animals. So I think some people are going to really enjoy this. Anyway, thank you so much again, Jim. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the next.
Well, thanks, Ben. Yes, I am too.
Thank you to James Matlock for talking with me. Thank you to our patrons for helping us to make content, and thank you for listening to it. I hope you enjoyed the interview, gained plenty of new insights, and maybe had your mind open to some new possibilities. Please see the description for James's links and our own. If you want to join us on our journey to unravel the universe, please subscribe. And if you want to help us continue to produce content, please consider a small monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.